Well, welcome everybody. Whether you are here in Lecture Theatre 1, in person, or are viewing this evening's events on the live stream. Welcome to the Courtauld, people on the live stream, and to the Centre for American Art Research Forum Lecture Theatre series. So I'm going to chair this evening, and I'm David Peter Scorbett. The Centre for American Art here is supported by the Courtauld and by generous funding from the Terra Foundation for American Art. Its purpose is to support research in American art defined in the broadest possible ways, and including subjects which are often not given a prominent place in studies specifically of US art and its histories. We do this through a number of streams of activity: our research programs and projects, the Terra postdoctoral fellowships that we offer in the centre, and through organising conferences and lectures to showcase international scholarship in the area. And we often, as we have tonight, have very distinguished scholars from the United States to talk. Now we're beginning to return to in-person events. I say often, and it's true, but actually this is the first in-person event, as Charlene knows, that I've done in a lecture format, at least, since the first lockdown in the beginning of 2020. And I think it's a new world. But we're back to in-person events. I'm delighted to welcome this evening's speaker, who's Professor Charlene Villaseñor-Black. Before I say something about Charlene, though, I should say that the lecture will take about 50 minutes, give or take, and we'll then have the opportunity to have informal questions and answers. I'm afraid that technical constraints mean that the live stream audience will not be able to pose questions, but you're welcome to stay and listen. And you will be able to hear the conversation. Finally, anybody who's in person is warmly invited to join us for a glass of wine and something more informal still in the Research Forum seminar room afterwards. So I'm really delighted and honoured to welcome Charlene Villaseñor-Black, who is Professor of Art History and Chicano Studies and Central American Studies at UCLA. She's the editor of Aztlán, A Journey of Chicano Studies, and founding editor-in-chief of the journal Latin American and Latinx Visual Culture. She publishes on a range of topics related to the early modern Iberian world, Chicanx studies, and contemporary Latinx art. To date, she's won 6 awards for her editing work, including recently 2 awards recognising the journal's outstanding debut as a distinguished new journal. Her most recent book, co-written, is Renaissance Futurities, Art, Science, Invention, published in 2019. She's co-edited the New Chicano Studies Reader, 2020, Autobiography Without Apology, The Personal Essay in Latino Studies, 2020, and Knowledge for Justice, an Ethnic Studies Reader, 2019. Her 2006 book, Creating the Cult of St. Joseph, Art and Gender in the Spanish Empire, won the College Arts Association's Millard Mice Award. In 2016, she was awarded UCLA's Gold Shield Faculty Prize for Academic Excellence. A monograph on colonial saints, entitled, I think I'm right, Transforming Saints, Women, Art and Conversion in Spain and Mexico, 1521-1800, is forthcoming from Vanderbilt University Press in July this year. Charlene has held grants from the Fulbright, Mellon, Beauchard and Woodrow Wilson Foundations, the NEH, the ACLS and the Getty. Currently she's PI of 2 substantial research projects including Verdant Worlds, Exploration and Sustainability Across the Cosmos, which is funded through the Getty Foundation's Pacific Standard Time Initiative. She's at the University of Oxford this year as the Terra Foundation Visiting Professor of American Art. I'm really, really grateful to you for coming and talking to us in person as well as on the live stream. Charlie, thank you. Subject tonight, Decolonizing Art History with Mexico's 10th Muse, Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for that beautiful introduction, and thank you to everyone who made it possible for me to be here at the Quartel today, and thank you to the Terra Foundation. They supported my year here. It's been actually a really, really wonderful year. Looking forward to more amazing things to come in the next few months. Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz is the most famous nun in the Spanish-speaking world, the subject of a telenovela in the 1980s, a racy movie by Maria Luisa Benberg in 1990, a novel by Elisa Gaspar de Alba published in 1999, a new movie in the works starring Ana de la Reguera, Mexican movie star, coming out in 2022, an opera that premiered in 2019 at UCLA by Carla Lucero, a 2019 series of photographs by Chicana artist Alma Lopez, a Netflix series filmed in 2015-2016, and the face of the Mexico 200 peso note since 1994 and the new 100 peso note since 2020. Her most famous poem, known by pretty much everyone in the Spanish-speaking world, is Hombres Necios, Foolish Men. Hombres necios que acusáis a la mujer sin razón, sin ver que sois la ocasión de lo mismo que culpáis. These various images of Sor Juana, who lived from 1648 to 1695, Mexican nun and literary genius, are all based on a posthumous portrait of her painted in 1750 by renowned Mexican colonial master Miguel Cabrera. Today, I examine this particular portrait of Mexico's 10th Muse in trans-historical perspective. In doing so, I depart today from narrow definitions of American art, expanding our lens hemispherically to demonstrate the deep connections between art created in colonial Mexico and that in the United States. I also depart chronologically from standard art histories. While this talk dwells in the 17th and 18th centuries, I conclude by moving into the 20th and 21st. The portrait in question was painted 50 years after Sor Juana's death in an epidemic in Mexico City, and 55 years after she abdicated her life as a scholar, seemingly forced to do so by the Catholic Church, according to most interpreters of her life. My close reading of the portrait, in dialogue with other portrayals of her, analogous depictions of scholars and nuns, and in concert with her own writings, demonstrates that Cabrera's image is unique among portrayals of the sitter. Further, I suggest that it was intended as a painted vindication of Sor Juana, one that visualizes the dangers of intellectual desire for women of the time. Then I place this colonial image in conversation with contemporary portrayals by Chicana or Mexican-American women artists. What can depictions of Sor Juana from the 18th century until today reveal about the risks, dangers, and benefits of bringing together art history and Chicana or Chicanx studies? Can the tools of what is now being called Chicanx studies, with an X to upset the gender binary and reference indigeneity, decolonize art history? And by Chicanx studies, I refer to the study of people of Mexican-American descent in the U.S. and elsewhere outside of Mexico, people whose narratives and histories have been left out of the study of U.S. history, culture, and the arts. So Chicana studies is about 50 years old, born in the wake of the civil rights movement, along with African American studies, Native American studies, Asian American studies, etc. And I think it's comparable here in the UK to critical race theory or critical race studies. So let us now turn to Cabrera's portrait. It is large, approximately life-size, signed and dated 1750 in the bottom left corner, and is currently in the Museo de Historia in Mexico City. In it, Sor Juana sits regally at her writing table, surrounded by books, inkwells, and plume pens. 60 books from her personal library, said to have numbered 4,000 volumes, appear in the background. She wears the habit of the Hieronymites, one of the wealthiest and most elite orders in the Spanish Empire. Her gaze is direct and assertive, her arm confidently laid over an open book, her fingers about to turn the page. We, the viewers, have interrupted her reading. Everything here, library setting, desk, open book, writing accoutrement, attests to Sor Juana's status as an intellectual. She was also a famous writer, a literary celebrity, the premier poet of the Hispanic late Baroque. Her work considered the pinnacle of what literature specialists still refer to as the Spanish Golden Age, that is the early modern period. Her most significant work, literary work, is her Primer Sueño, The Dream, a philosophical poem of 975 verses, written in 1692 about the human intellect. In addition to verse, she also authored prose, plays, and music. Today, she is legendary due to the circumstances surrounding the final years of her life, her involvement in a conflict between the Bishop of Puebla and the new Archbishop of Mexico City. The conflict culminated in 1690, when Sor Juana penned an attack upon the Portuguese Jesuit theologian Antonio de Vieira, and this is the so-called letter to Sor Filotea, or the Carta Tenegorica. The letter, disguised as a brilliant theological critique, was a thinly veiled denunciation of the Archbishop of Mexico City. This audacious letter, penned by a brazen nun, infuriated the Archbishop. And knowledge of it became public when the Bishop of Puebla published it without her permission. Controversy over the letter swirled throughout Mexico City in the ensuing months. Then, the Archbishops of Mexico City, Puebla, and Sor Juana's own confessor took action against her, attempting to curtail her freedom to write and study. It wasn't bad enough that Sor Juana had spent her life composing poetry and participating in secular life, but in the letter she had dared to take up the topic of theology, the study of which had been traditionally denied to women in the church. In response to their attempts to rein her in, Sor Juana dared to pen another letter, an extraordinary retort to her male critics, and this was 3 months later in March of 1691. Entitled La Respuesta, the answer or the response of the poet, Sor Juana's retort defended a woman's right to be a scholar and writer. This is one of the most amazing things I've ever read, translated into English. I cite it to students all the time. It's an easy, short read. Unfortunately, the story did not end here with the response of the poet. Criticism of Sor Juana intensified, and in 1694, she signed a document in her own blood with the words, "I, the worst woman of all," or "I, the worst of all," yo la peor de todas. Agreeing to renounce her studies and turning over her library to the Archbishop of Mexico City. She died within months during an epidemic, caring for her fellow nuns. And her tomb is there. You can go see it in her former convent. Feminist scholars have believed that Sor Juana was censored and silenced by the male ecclesiastical hierarchy in New Spain. More recently, though, skeptics have suggested a more nuanced view that Sor Juana willingly gave up her life as a writer, albeit under great pressure from the church. I tend to support the first interpretation, but in any case, these differing explanations do not affect my view of her portraiture. I do want to point out, though, that nothing is known as of yet of the circumstances of the painting's commission. It entered the History Museum collection as part of a group of portraits of viceroys and high-ranking churchmen in the 19th century, which leads me to believe it had a distinguished provenance and perhaps a high-ranking patron. According to its enigmatic, lengthy inscription, seen at the bottom, which has not yet been fully deciphered, the portrait is a copy of a 17th century original that formerly hung in Sor Juana's convent of San Jerónimo in Mexico City. Some have speculated that this may be a replica of a lost original self-portrait, supposedly by Sor Juana's own hand, which she seems to refer to in one of her poems. Most art historians, though, concur that Cabrera's painting was based on the earlier, also famous portrayal by Juan de Miranda, executed in the late 17th or early 18th century. While there are some obvious similarities, if this was the model, Cabrera introduced notable changes. So let's begin with the pictorial evidence. How did viewers at the time, in the 18th century, understand this portrait? Those familiar with the history of Mexican art immediately recognize that when compared to other Mexican nun portraits, Cabrera's painting stands out as unusual. Most images of nuns are monjas coronadas, crowned nuns, that represent the sitter richly costumed and wearing an elaborate floral crown, her last act of worldly vanity before celebrating profession. Less frequently, some portraits employ a simple and austere style to render the sitter with eyes closed, pictorializing the renunciation of the world. In contrast, Cabrera's portrait of Sor Juana is striking for its assertiveness and directness, as well as its insistence upon her status as an intellectual. Cabrera's portrait of Sor Juana is unique, but not without precedence. Art historian and curator Marcus Burke of the Hispanic Society in New York has noted its general similarity to prelate portraits, and we see similarities to these 16th century frescoes from Actopan in Mexico. Were women ever depicted using the scholar-cleric compositional type? In fact, two notable women, Saint Teresa of Avila, the great 16th century Spanish mystic, writer, and reformer of the Discalced Carmelite order, as well as the Spanish religious writer, visionary nun, Sor Maria de Agreda, were also portrayed in a similar manner. Saint Teresa, in fact, seems to have been the first female sitter depicted in this portrait type, and thus images of her may have been a source for Cabrera's unusual image. The correspondences between Cabrera's portrayal of Sor Juana and depictions of Saint Teresa are striking, as seen in this comparison with a painting by the Spanish artist Francisco de Zurbarán of circa 1640. Furthermore, Cabrera's intentionally archaic style closely mimics the Baroque realism of the 17th century, which makes sense if this is supposedly a copy of an earlier work. These persuasive parallels find confirmation in Sor Juana's writings, and especially in her response of the poet, in which Saint Teresa plays a central role as the author's spiritual and intellectual mother, and that's the word she uses. In fact, today I argue that Sor Juana's response, which has been understood as a literary self-portrait, is the key to understanding Miguel Cabrera's portrayal. Sor Juana, who had briefly been a member of the Reformed Discalced order, clearly looked to Saint Teresa for inspiration. This isn't that surprising. Like Sor Juana, Teresa had been similarly criticized by the Church for her writing and intellectual abilities. And indeed, Sor Juana marshaled the example of Saint Teresa to defend herself from Church critics who said she should not write. One of her major defensive strategies in her response was to demonstrate that the Church had a history of tolerating prominent women writers and scholars. Furthermore, the example of Teresa, whom Sor Juana references 4 times in the response, was made more powerful because she had achieved renown as a writer during her lifetime, that is, before her canonization. By intentionally reusing a portrait type associated with St. Teresa, Cabrera's image demonstrates the artist's understanding of their analogous relationship. There are some subtle differences, though, introduced by Cabrera, and these changes, I believe, were strategic. Most notably, in contrast to Teresa, Sor Juana's fame as an author is downplayed. In contrast, Zurbarán presents St. Teresa in the act of writing. As she looks up to the dove of the Holy Spirit, she prominently holds up her pen, making clear the divine inspiration of her writings. Although Cabrera's portrait of Sor Juana includes her inkwell and pens, it does not depict amongst the 60 books a single work by Sor Juana herself, nor is she shown in the act of writing. Why not? After all, she was a renowned late Baroque poet famed throughout the Spanish Empire. And other portraits, most notably those by Juan de Miranda, or this one, by Mexican artist Andrés de Islas from 1722, showcase the muse in the act of writing, as do the other portraits of the sitter, such as these two, Nicolas Enriquez and an unnamed artist. These portraits also always include a book that she's written, and you can read the title of the book there. Does Cabrera's omission indicate his understanding of Sor Juana's conflict with the Catholic ecclesiastical hierarchy? Has Cabrera represented the Church's silencing of Sor Juana's pen? Seemingly so. Writing was, after all, the source of her conflict with the Church. And in the response, Sor Juana repeatedly asserts that she has neither the desire nor the talent to write, standard claims in nuns' writings. For example, she insists at one point, quote, "And truth to tell, I have never written save when pressed and forced, and solely to give pleasure to others, not only without taking satisfaction, but with downright aversion, because I have never judged myself to possess the rich trove of learning and wit that is perforce the obligation of one who writes," end quote. Instead of drawing attention to her writing, Cabrera follows the response in presenting Sor Juana as a scholar. She is depicted in the act of reading and is surrounded by books on theology, science, philosophy, rhetoric, and the arts, which have been identified by Mexican art historian Francisco de la Maza. This shift in emphasis mirrors the strategy of the response to downplay her fame as a poet in order to focus on her right as a woman to a life of study. A comparison with the depiction of Sor Maria de Agreda confirms the unique nature of Cabrera's portrait. Sor Juana marshals her example in the response as another female scholar tolerated by the Church, and this has been noted by Arenal and Powell in 2009. Images of her similarly employ the scholar-cleric compositional format, but once again, Sor Maria de Agreda is depicted as a famed writer, pen held aloft, the author of A Controversial Life of the Virgin Mary, the mystical city of God, La Mística Ciudad de Dios. This was inspired by a series of visions. While images of St. Teresa and Sor Maria de Agreda are clearly major inspirations for Cabrera's posthumous portrait of Sor Juana, the ultimate source of both of these, as well as all portraits of religious scholars or writers, is the image of St. Jerome in his study. The most learned of the Latin doctors, the translator of the Bible, and the patron of humanist learning, St. Jerome played a central role in Sor Juana's writings. Images of him in his study, which began to appear in the late Middle Ages, enjoyed a heyday in the Renaissance. This is a very famous example, one of my favorites, by Jan van Eyck in Detroit. In fact, Sor Juana repeatedly refers to Jerome as her great father, or describes herself as his daughter in her writings. And don't forget that she was a member of the Hieronymite order. Jerome, too, had come under attack by the Catholic Church for his intellectual endeavors. In a vision inspired by his guilty love of classical literature, an angel accused Jerome of preferring Cicero to the Bible. In the response, Sor Juana compared her difficulties with the church to those of St. Jerome. Quote, "For me, it has not been knowledge, but the desire to know that has cost me so dear that I might truly say, like my good father St. Jerome, what efforts I spent on that task, what difficulties I had to face, how often I despaired, how often I gave up, and then in my eagerness to learn, began again." End quote. The analogy to Jerome is strengthened by the visual evidence of Cabrera's portrait, which, like its prototype, depicts its sitter in a study, intently reading, surrounded by books and the objects of scholarly life. In other words, Cabrera's portrait does not construct Sor Juana's identity as that of a famed poet, but as a learned scholar. Of the 60 books depicted, patristic texts by the church fathers are given a position of prominence in the center of the painting. One volume, however, is missing: the writings of St. Jerome. In fact, that is the volume that Sor Juana is reading, which I discovered when I used a ladder to get up close onto the painting in the museum. My close examination of the painting even revealed the title at the top of the open page of the fictive volume on Sor Juana's desk. She's reading St. Jerome's commentary on Psalm 50, on the great penitential psalm, now numbered 51 in the Western Church. Miserere mei Deus, secundum magna misericordiam tuam. Have mercy on me, O God, according to thy great mercy. This is, of course, the psalm that begins the Ash Wednesday service at the beginning of Lent. Jerome's commentaries on the Psalms can be found in his Breviarium in Salmos, written around 391-392. In them, Jerome singles out specific lines from each psalm and elaborates on their meaning. The text begins with a penitential declaration and ends with a plea for forgiveness. It takes as its topic the acceptable sacrifice, a critique of hypocrites who practice religion without true morality. Is this a commentary on Sor Juana's persecutors? Has Sor Juana chosen Jerome's commentary on these verses of the Psalms in order to defend her own verses? In the response, she does insist that St. Jerome praised the verses of the Psalms, and that similarly many sacred books, including those by Ambrose, Thomas, Isidore, and others, were written in meter. Thus, the Church should find no fault with her verses. That Sor Juana is reading St. Jerome confirms the centrality of the Latin doctor for the construction of her scholarly identity. She also singles him out as a promoter of women's education. In the juridical style typical of her defense, she cites Jerome's various letters to female followers. Several of them, and especially his letters to Laeta Paula and Eustochium, address the importance of the education of women. Sor Juana argues that if Jerome were alive today, he would be an ardent supporter of the education of women, girls, and especially nuns. And I'm showing you the Dürer version of this just to make the point the iconography is very stable at this point, and then bringing us back to the Jan van Eyck. Clearly, the figure of St. Jerome was central to the construction of Sor Juana's intellectual identity. And the image of the saint at work in his studies surrounded by books, pens, and inkwell must be acknowledged as the ultimate source of Sor Juana's portrait. Cabrera's image, however, is remarkable for its incredible amplification of the number of books. Neither images of Jerome in his study nor other portraits of scholars or writers contain such an immense array. Books occupied a similar position of importance in Sor Juana's life and in her response. She reported that as a child, she, quote, read and read, studied and studied, with only my books as teachers. In In another similar passage, she noted that, quote, "My only teacher was a mute book, my only schoolfellow an unfeeling inkwell," end quote. She even found her female role models in books, including such eminent and scholarly women as St. Teresa, St. Catherine, Deborah, Judith, and others. Finally, the insistent display of books attests to her claims that she is first and foremost a scholar and not a worldly poet, an assertion central to her self-defense. Quote, "All that I have desired has been to study so as to become less ignorant," end quote, she wrote. Because Sor Juana came under attack primarily for daring to write on theology, comparisons with other images of eminent theologians are revealing. Cabrera's portrait, similar in many respects to depictions of these men, clearly situates Sor Juana within their lineage, as we can see in these various representations of St. Augustine. So I'm showing you initially this late 15th century woodcut. Her portrait claims that she is part of this genealogy, a descendant of the most famous church fathers and theologians. Her response, with its numerous citations of their works, demonstrates that she did indeed envision herself heir to this tradition. This was an audacious and dangerous claim on her part, and one that ultimately may have led to her downfall. So here's another example, Botticelli. Finally, Sor Juana's identity is further inflected by the prominent image of the Annunciation to the Virgin worn at her throat. This oval-shaped painting is an escudo, part of the attire worn by the Hieronymite order, which usually depicts a nun's favorite devotional image. The importance of Sor Juana's escudo in the painting is signaled by its size, so large as to compete with her face. Her choice of the Annunciation is also quite unusual. My survey of nuns' portraits of the 17th and 18th centuries indicates that the vast majority of nuns were images of the Immaculate Conception or the Virgin of Guadalupe. So the Immaculate Conception here. In fact, I've only found 2 other escudos with the Annunciation. What role did this theme play in Sor Juana's life? Does it provide additional commentary on her scholarly identity? So we actually have the escudo, which was taken out of the tomb. It's made of tortoiseshell. The painting's been completely effaced, but you can actually see that the artist made it larger, exaggerated it, and made it more oval-shaped. The scene of the Annunciation depicts the angel Gabriel's appearance to the Virgin Mary to announce that she will be the Mother of God. At this moment, the incarnation, a miraculous impregnation, occurs. In the escudo, Mary, like Sor Juana, appears at a desk reading. According to tradition, she is reading the prophecy of the coming of the Messiah in the book of Isaiah. The scene encodes important allusions to the significance of text. For at the moment of the incarnation, the Word that is Christ became flesh in Mary's womb. The Annunciation scene can also be understood as referring to Mary not only as a reader, but as an author. After this momentous event, Mary visited her cousin Elizabeth, who was the first to recognize Mary's miraculous condition. Mary's response to her cousin's recognition is recounted in the Gospel of Luke, where Mary proclaims, "My soul doth magnify the Lord, and my spirit hath rejoiced in God my Savior, because he hath regarded the humility of his handmaid. For behold, from henceforth all generations shall call me blessed." These are the celebrated words of the Magnificat, one of the oldest hymns in Christianity. And in the response of the poet, Sor Juana defends her right to pen poetry by reporting that, quote, "Our Lady, the Queen of Knowledge, with her blessed lips intoned the canticle of the Magnificat," end quote. In other words, Mary wrote verse, just like Sor Juana. What more efficacious defense of a woman's right to poetry could be found? The escudo encodes, I believe, yet another layer of meaning. In her guise as the word bearer, Mary is an image of the Holy Mother Church, La Santa Madre Iglesia, as Sor Juana repeatedly refers to it in her writings. How could the Holy Mother Church, embodied literally by the pregnant Virgin Mary, refuse her daughter Sor Juana the right to a scholarly life? Sor Juana asks this very question of her detractors. Quote, "For if she, with her most holy authority, does not forbid my writing, why must others forbid it?" End quote. Her devotion to and connection with Mary is further emphasized by the fact that, with one hand, Sor Juana clutches her rosary as the other turns the page of her text. To conclude with this colonial image and move on to more contemporary ones, reading Cabrera's portrait of Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz in conjunction with the response of the poet deepens our understanding of the image. Painted in 1750, 55 years after her death during an epidemic, it is a pictorial vindication of Mexico's Phoenix, her 10th muse. That the image is intended to exonerate Sor Juana is indicated by Cabrera's prominent placement of the clock. In the allegorical language of her time, the clock reminds the viewer that time unveils truth and reveals innocence. I focused today on Cabrera's portrait, but I've shown you nearly all the rest of the extant early modern and colonial portrayals of Sor Juana. All were portraits, and they characterized her as Mexico's famed poet, with the exception of Cabrera, who emphasized her life as a scholar. Her iconic image emerges again in Mexican art with the advent of the mural renaissance in the 1920s in public murals and sculptures. And I present now rather quickly a handful of Mexican examples as a starting point for my discussion of Chicana or Mexican-American women artists' revitalization of Sor Juana. In this mural from 1947 by Diego Rivera, his Dream of a Sunday Afternoon in the Alameda Park, Sor Juana can be seen on the left in the middle ground between a grotesque caricature of the Spanish king and a chilling scene of the Inquisition, a reference to colonial Mexico's grisly history, but also to Sor Juana's final conflict with the Catholic Church. So you see her right there. I detect a certain ambivalence about her here and in other artworks of the era. A great writer and intellectual, she also brings to mind the Catholic Church and the abuses of colonial power that led to independence in 1821 and later the Revolution of 1910. Placed by Rivera on the side and in the middle ground, she is subordinated to the great political leaders depicted. A number of later 20th century artists in Mexico created easel paintings of the nun. These artists tend to focus on her final conflict with the Catholic Church and her internal conflict between societal expectations of her as a woman and her intellectual desires. Alfredo Castaneda's 1979 image entitled Sor Juana's Dream references her most important literary work, The Primer Sueño, The First Dream, published in 1692, about the journey of the human soul during the course of the night. Employing a hyperrealist style, Castaneda's haunting painting also references dreams more generally, a major concern among surrealist artists. We see Sor Juana's head lying on its side, separated from her body, its horizontal placement intended to evoke sleep, perhaps. Her uncanny open eyes look upward. A plume pen held in Sor Juana's right hand is poised to write on a blank page. Castaneda portrays her intellect separated from her body, her mind freed from rules imposed on it because of her biological sex. The corners of the image on the verge of dissolving, of coming undone, call attention to the constructedness of the image. The painting is illogical, like a dream. Surprisingly, though, Sor Juana's image is not very visible in 20th century Mexican fine arts. Many of the paintings depicting her are small in size, and most of them are in private collections, not accessible to the public in museums, an assessment I make based on the work of Noemi Atamoros Zeller, who published a book in 1995 cataloging all the depictions of Sor Juana that she could find. Her association with the Catholic Church and her status as an intellectual limits her popular appeal, perhaps, although she is very visible on the Mexican 100 peso or 200 peso note, as I mentioned at the beginning. By contrast, in the U.S., Sor Juana is becoming a major icon in Chicana art, an emblem of Chicana feminism, a foremother, in the words of Diana Rebolledo and Alicia Gaspar de Alba, author of the novel on Sor Juana I mentioned earlier, and a major Chicana feminist scholar. This interest seems to date to the 1980s and 90s. In 1990, Maria Luisa Bamberg directed an Argentine film dedicated to Sor Juana's life, Yo la peor de todas, I the worst woman of all. It was based on the widely hailed biography of Sor Juana by Octavio Paz, first published in Spanish in 1982 and translated into English in 1988. In contrast to Paz, though, scholars increasingly began to elaborate and focus on Sor Juana's probable love affair with the Villa Reina, Maria Luisa Manrique de Lara, the Countess of Paredes, whom Sor Juana nicknamed Lisi and for whom she wrote a number of love poems. Sor Juana became a lesbian icon. Artists quickly responded to Sor Juana's increasing visibility. One of the earliest and most moving artistic meditations on Sor Juana was that created by Amalia Mesa Baines in her 1994 installation, Venus MV2, The Harem and Other Enclosures, and this was at Williams College. The second zone of the installation, entitled Sor Juana's Library, recreated the writer's desk, complete with books and other scholarly accoutrements, as well as musical and scientific instruments and natural science specimens. The installation also included a reading area where viewers could sit and peruse books and drawings. The artist employed strategies familiar from her other altar installations, an art form that combines contemporary installation practices with Chicana vernacular practices drawn from home altars and ofrendas, a definition provided by Jennifer Gonzalez in her book, Subject to Display. While referencing Sor Juana as a historical figure, Mesa Baines made clear Sor Juana's relevance to contemporary Chicanas by including newspaper articles about protests at Williams College organized by female students asking the college to hire a Latina professor. Mesa Baines juxtaposed video stills drawn from footage of these protests to a copy of a colonial portrait of the nun, as Gonzalez has pointed out. The artist thus connected the struggles of Latina scholars to find acceptance in the academy with Sor Juana's battle for acceptance as a female intellectual in the 17th century. In attempting to recover and revalorize forgotten Mexican and Latina women from history, to give them agency, to wrest them from Eurocentric heteropatriarchal models of scholarship and art making, Mesa Baines undertakes a decolonizing project. I understand this term decolonizing is drawn from decolonial, as theorized in the Americas, initially by Aníbal Quijano in 1991 and later elaborated by Walter Mignolo and others. It builds on important previous work by scholars of color, Frantz Fanon, Sylvia Wynter, Aimé Césaire. Decolonial approaches contest coloniality, or the coloniality of power, the moment we are living in right now, the legacy of the colonial era, that is, modernity, described by Mignolo as, quote, the underlying logic of all Western, modern colonial imperialisms, end quote. To quote Nelson Malvado Torres, another current important voice in the decolonizing movement, quote, decolonization is more amply a project to undo the legacy of coloniality in every aspect of our existence, including in knowledge, power, and being, end quote. Decolonization, or the decolonial turn, is a response to Western colonialism, coloniality, and, quote, its radical, long-standing forms of systemic dehumanization, end quote. Such an approach challenges Eurocentrism and Eurocentric notions of universality. It makes visible the history of power as it performs what Mignolo has called epistemic disobedience. To commit epistemic disobedience is to delink from the zero-point epistemology, defined by Colombian philosopher Santiago Castro Gomez in 2005 as the assumption of Europe as the model and European knowledge as objective and true. Decolonial approaches also have a strong activist arm in indigenous rights movements, in contrast to post-colonialism, which primarily occurred in the academy. Soon after this work by Amalia Mesa Baines, other Chicana artists produced more decolonizing artworks, foregrounding the intersectionality of Chicana feminism, an approach to feminism that recognizes the overlapping oppressions facing Chicanas as both women and people of color. In fact, some artists and writers seem to portray Sor Juana as the perfect example of intersectionality. For example, a decolonial intersectional approach can be seen in work by Alma Lopez, the digital Euro print Las 4 from 1997, and a more recent print, La Peor de Todas, 2013, from a series of the same name. Las 4, created for the Community Center in Estrada Courts in the Boyle Heights section of Los Angeles, features a casual scene of 4 young women seated on a step in the neighborhood, one holding a young child, while their 4 mothers look on from above: Dolores Huerta, Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz, and Adelita from the Mexican Revolution, and indigenous rights activist Rigoberta Menchú. So you can see them up here with Dolores Huerta and Rigoberta Menchú. A ghostly image of the Aztec moon goddess Coyolxauhqui rises above. Coyolxauhqui was the sister of the Aztec war god Huitzilopochtli, both the children of the earth deity Coatlicue, or serpent skirt. When Coyolxauhqui discovered that their mother was pregnant, she led her brothers in an attack on her for dishonoring them. At this moment, Huitzilopochtli was born from Coatlicue, fully grown and armed. He beheaded and dismembered his sister Coyolxauhqui, throwing her body down Serpent Mountain, or Coatepec. We see the aftermath rendered here in this Aztec sculpture, rediscovered in 1978 by electrical workers in Mexico City, and originally created in the late 15th century. So you can see she's decapitated and her body's been dismembered. This story has been interpreted by Chicana lesbian theorists such as Alicia Gaspar de Alba as Coyolxauhqui rising up against patriarchy, in which they refigure the goddess as an anti-war activist and feminist icon. And that is how we should understand it in the hands of Chicana lesbian artists such as Alma Lopez. Thus, the pairing of the 4 heroines above creates a revolutionary genealogy for Chicana women descended from the goddess Coyolxauhqui, feminist icon and war protester. Lopez gave her later print of 2013 a similar political reading. In it, we see 2 figures, Sor Juana, after Juan de Alameda's portrait, on the left, and a revolutionary Chicana or Mexicana on the right, proudly wearing bandoliers, a reference to the Mexican Revolution, but now with roses replacing bullets. The ghostly Coyolxauhqui floats above. The figures in the print are again posed to suggest a visual connection between them. Both hold outsized plume pens in their hands, the revolutionaries dripping ink to form the bloody words at the bottom, La Peor de Todas, I, the worst woman of all, a reference to Sor Juana's signature in blood on the 1694 penitential letter. Lopez's image suggests a continuity between the work of Sor Juana and the revolutionary with her dripping pen. Indeed, a continuity with the ancient Mesoamerican goddess Coyolxauhqui, figured in the background, theorized by Alicia Gaspar de Alba as not only an anti-war goddess, but as a rebel with a cause, part of the title of her 2014 book. Both works by Lopez appear as palimpsests, in which Lopez keeps past and present at play, bringing to visibility historical echoes. Both embody what Argentine theorist Nestor Garcia Canclini called multi-temporal heterogeneity, a trait characteristic of postmodern Latin America, where ancient, colonial, modern, and postmodern worlds and practices coexist. In contrast to Western Europe, modernization, quote, did not replace the traditional or the ancient, end quote, in the Americas. Multi-temporality also characterizes the work of Latinx artists such as Lopez and others, who are clearly engaged in historicizing projects, yet also positioned on the forefront of the latest aesthetic and cultural debates. Lopez's artistic production takes history seriously, questioning its discursive formation and arguing for the importance of the relationship between our past and our present. Similar strategies can be seen in a work dated 1999 by Reina de Cervantes, Mujer de Mucho Nahua par ti Chicana, a serigraph created at Self-Help Graphics in East Los Angeles. As the title reveals, the artist dedicated this print to other Chicanas or Mexican-American women. That's the second half of the title, the parti for you, Chicana. The artist has explained the first half of the title in an interview with Lara Medina of 2005. Mujer de Mucho Nahua means a woman with a lot of petticoats, a woman of strength, courage, and integrity, according to Cervantes. In her print, we see two major figures, Sor Juana on the right and a Zapatista, based on their female leader, Comandante Ramona, on the left, two children in tow. The Zapatistas, or the Ejército Zapatista de Liberación Nacional, the EZLN, the Zapatista Army of National Liberation, holds power throughout much of the southern Mexican state of Chiapas. They have been in conflict with the Mexican government since 1994. Named after Emiliano Zapata, one of the indigenous leaders of the Mexican Revolution, EZLN is made up of predominantly indigenous Maya peoples, and it was also formed to protest NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, which is 1994, and I think of it as also anti-liberal and pro-indigenous rights. In the center, a large hand, the hand of the goddess, according to Cervantes, rises up, decorated with a spiral form representing timelessness and a Mayan phrase, Mishik Baliel, that reads, the navel of the universe. Below it, an Aztec toponym represents the mountain of Cihuacuatl, the snake woman. Speech scrolls issue from the mouths of both the revolutionary and Sor Juana. They're parallel, symmetric placement suggesting visual equivalence between the two. Sor Juana's struggle is that of the Zapatistas, and vice versa. Sor Juana's nun's badge, which normally portrays the Annunciation to the Virgin, has been transformed here by Cervantes into a portrait of Rosario Castellanos, a Mexican poet from Chiapas. Text from a poem by her is inscribed on Sor Juana's figure. Thus, Sor Juana's struggles as a female intellectual in colonial Mexico are explicitly linked to 20th century Mexican women's political struggles. Allow me a few concluding thoughts. I believe that Sor Juana Inés de la Cruz is poised to become a major figure among Chicana and Chicano artists, much like depictions of the Adelita, the Virgin Guadalupe, or Frida Kahlo. Given a decolonial reading, she has the potential to become a major activist emblem. Her figure argues for women's rights to be intellectuals, and as conceptualized by Chicana artists and writers, she is seen as a proto-feminist, an early figure in a proud revolutionary lineage of women with mucha nahua, a lot of petticoats. Although Sor Juana wrote in Nahuatl, she probably was not indigenous herself. She was born out of wedlock to a Creole mother in San Miguel de Pantla outside of Mexico City. Nevertheless, Chicana artists have recast her as a defender of indigenous rights today. I have much to learn from these contemporary artists and their images. Initially trained in early modern and colonial art history, I am inspired by their decolonizing intersectional approaches, which I consciously appropriate in my art historical scholarship. So, to return to my earlier question, can Chicanx studies decolonize art history? My answer is yes, which I tried to demonstrate today. Inspired by Walter Mignolo's concept of epistemic disobedience, today I questioned authority. I questioned received wisdom and the very boundaries, temporal and geographic, of the discipline of art history. Thinking about Sor Juana as a Chicana enabled me to reinterpret her colonial image in a new way. By doing so, I became attuned to the dangers of intellectual desire coded into Miguel Cabrera's 1750 portrait. Thank you.